This is part 17 of the series we've been doing on the last days of the Old Covenant, going through Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse. And Jesus says the whole temple, Jerusalem, all going to be torn down. And disciples wondering when it's going to happen. And Jesus telling them it's in their generation. And he's been going through everything that's leading up to that. And that leads us up to now verse 29 of Matthew 24. That says, "But immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken." So this is the verse that all the literalists, people that take this totally literal, they cannot get past this verse because the stars clearly haven't fallen yet. Therefore, this whole discourse must be future. And even though there's thousands of verses that prove that it happened in Jesus's generation, it has to be future for them because stars haven't fallen yet. But what does the sun, moon, and stars picture in Scripture? That's what we want to understand. So we're going to go back to the beginning, to Genesis, and we're going to see what these things picture. So first thing is, it pictures rulers in Genesis 1. Genesis 1, 14 through 18 says, "Then God said, 'Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth.' And it was so. God made the two great lights, the great light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and also the stars. And God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule the day and the night, and to separate the light from darkness. And God saw that it was good." So first thing we see is that they're representing rulers. Also, it represents Israel in Genesis 37:9. This is when Joseph had his dream. Genesis 37:9. "Then he had still another dream and recounted it to his brothers and said, 'Behold, I have had still another dream. And behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me.'" And so you got the sun, moon, and the stars, which all these stars, that's all the tribes of Israel. This pictured Israel. And so sun, moon, and stars pictures Israel, and it pictures rulers. And then sun, moon, and stars is also used in judgment language for the judgment of nations, especially Israel. And you see this all over the Old Testament. First, I look at judgment language from Isaiah 13:10, which is about Babylon being judged by God through the Medes, the Medo-Persian Empire. And this is actually the verse that Jesus was quoting, is Isaiah 13:10. So I'm just going to read a few verses first, just to show what I'm talking about. Isaiah 13:1, "The oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amoz beheld." So this is about Babylon. Verse 10, "For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light." And then verse 17 says, "Behold, I'm going to awaken the Medes against them, who will not think about silver or take pleasure in gold." So this whole passage of Isaiah 13 is about the judgment of Babylon by the Medo-Persian Empire. And he uses this language of the sun, moon, and stars going out. And the thing is, the whole chapter is filled with this metaphoric language. And so I actually want to read the whole chapter, just to have it in your brain that this is the destruction of Babylon, but it sounds like the destruction of the world. So I'm going to read Isaiah 13:1 through 22. "The oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amoz beheld. Lift up a standard on the bare hill. Heighten your voice at them. Wave the hand that they may enter the doors of the nobles. I have commanded my set apart ones. I have even called my mighty warriors, my proudly exulting ones, to execute my anger. A sound of tumult on the mountains, like that of many peoples. A sound of the rumbling of kingdoms, of nations gathered together. Yahweh of hosts is mustering the hosts for battle. They are coming from a far country, from the end of the sky. Yahweh and his instruments of indignation to wreak destruction on the whole land. Just quick note that this is the Medo-Persian Empire, and he's calling them his holy ones because they're doing his work of the destruction of Babylon. Verse 6, wail, for the day of Yahweh is near. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Therefore all hands will fall limp, and every man's heart will melt. They will be terrified. Pains and labor pangs will take hold of them. They will writhe like a woman in labor. They will look at one another in astonishment, their faces aflame. Behold, the day of Yahweh is coming, cruel and fury and burning anger, to make the land a desolation, and he will exterminate its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light. Thus I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will also put an end to the pride of the arrogant and bring low the lofty pride of the ruthless. So it talks about the destruction of the world, but we know that it's the Persians, the Medo-Persian Empire, destroying Babylon. Verse 12, I will make mortal man scarcer than fine gold, and mankind than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I'll make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken from its place at the fury of Yahweh of hosts in the day of his burning anger. And it will be that like a hunted gazelle, or like sheep with none to gather them, they will each turn to his own people, and each one will flee to his own land. Anyone who is found will be pierced through, and anyone who is captured will fall by the sword. Their infants also will be dashed to pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be plundered and their wives ravished. Behold, I am going to awaken the Medes against them, who will not think about silver or take pleasure in gold. And their bows will dash the young men to pieces. They will not even have compassion on the fruit of the womb, nor will their eye pity children. And it will be that Babylon, the beauty of kingdoms, the honor of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It will never be inhabited or dwelt in from generation to generation. Nor will the Arab pitch his tent there, nor will shepherds make their flock lie down there. But desert creatures will lie down there, and their houses will be full of owls. Ostriches will dwell there, and shaggy goats will leap there, and hyenas will howl in their fortified towers, and jackals in their luxurious palaces. Her fateful time also will come, and her days will not be prolonged. So you just hear all that judgment language. Sounds like the destruction of the world, not just the people, but the earth itself. But it's simply the judgment of Babylon. And if God uses that language for Babylon, why is it so far-fetched for him to use that same language for Israel or Jerusalem? Well, he does, and we'll get to that in a minute. But he also uses this language for judgment on Egypt. Ezekiel 32. Just going to read a few verses. Start in verse 2, Ezekiel 32. Son of man, take up a lamentation over Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and say to him, you liken yourself to a young lion of the nations, yet you are like the monster in the seas, and you burst forth in your rivers and muddied the waters with your feet and fouled their rivers. Verse 7. And when I extinguish you, I will cover the heavens and darken the stars. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon will not give its light. There's that same language again. All the shining lights in the heavens I will darken over you, and will give darkness on your land, declares Lord Yahweh. Verse 11, for thus says Lord Yahweh, the sword of the king of Babylon will come upon you. Verse 15, when I make the land of Egypt a desolation, and the land is desolate of its fullness, when I strike all those who inhabit it, then they shall know that I am Yahweh. So this is Babylon judging Egypt. And Egypt wasn't completely destroyed. We still have Egypt today. But you have that same language of the destruction of the sun, moon, and stars. So also we see judgment on Jerusalem, and that's in Joel chapter 2. And I'm going to read a few verses in there, verse 1, 10, and 30 through 32. Blow a trumpet in Zion, and make a loud shout on my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of Yahweh is coming. Surely it is near. Verse 10. Before them the earth trembles, the heavens quake, the sun and the moon grow dark, and the stars lose their brightness. Verse 30, and I will put wonders in the sky and on the earth, blood, fire, and columns of smoke. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and awesome day of Yahweh comes. And it will be that everyone who calls on the name of Yahweh will be delivered. For on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there will be those who escape, as Yahweh has said, even among the survivors who Yahweh calls. And so we see Babylon also destroying Jerusalem, and also they went back to the land, a remnant survived, and then they would be destroyed again in 70 AD by the Roman Empire. And that's what Jesus is focusing on. But he's bringing all this history and showing that all these things happened in the past, and it's going to happen to Jerusalem in his generation. And then Revelation 6, which is Revelation's all about the destruction of Jerusalem, which is called Babylon, because what I read earlier in Isaiah 13, destruction of Babylon, Babylon was a type of Israel, a type of wicked Israel. And that's why he calls them Babylon in Revelation, because Babylon's already gone, but Israel, Jerusalem specifically, was about to be destroyed. And so let me read Revelation 6, 12 through 17. Then I looked when he opened the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. And the sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their place. Then the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the commanders, and the rich, and the strong, and every slave and free man, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? And so he's also quoting even more scripture, Isaiah 2 and Hosea, same language with the mountains falling on them, hiding in the caves. And Jesus quotes that to the women in Luke, saying that weep for yourselves and your children. And he quotes these verses because this was going to happen to them in their generation. And we see it unfolding in Revelation. So also Isaiah 24 talks about the covenant breakers being judged. Then there's a regime change. The leaders are confined to Jerusalem and the temple, and then burned after being shamed. And the new elders are glorified, and the old earth/land is emptied and destroyed. But I'm not going to read all of Isaiah 24, but I'll give you some highlighted verses. But that's what it's talking about. Verse 3, Isaiah 24. The earth will be completely emptied to destruction and completely plundered, for Yahweh has spoken this word. And just so you know, that word earth can be translated land. And so it's not talking about the whole earth, it's talking about Israel because of verse 5, which I'll read right now. The earth is also polluted by its inhabitants, for they trespassed laws, violated statutes, broke the everlasting covenant. Well, who was in covenant with God? Well, it was Israel. So that's what Isaiah 24 is focusing on. Verse 19 through 23. The earth is broken asunder. The earth is split through. The earth is shaken violently. The earth reels to and fro like a drunkard, and it totters like a shack. For its transgression is heavy upon it, and it will fall, never to rise again. So it will be in that day that Yahweh will punish the host of heights on high, and the kings of the earth on earth. They will be gathered together like prisoners in the pit, and will be confined in prison, and after many days they will be punished. Then the moon will be humiliated, and the sun ashamed. For Yahweh of hosts will reign on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and his glory will be before his elders. So all of that happened in leading up to 70 AD with the Roman army. They were all confined in Jerusalem, eventually confined in the temple, and then they were burned up and everything it's describing exactly what happened. And we have historical records to know that. All right, back to Matthew 24:29. So it also says, after the sun being darkened, moon not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky. And then it says, the powers of the heavens will be shaken. So what are the powers of heaven? Is Jesus drawn from the Old Testament? Yes. So the powers of heaven is found in Daniel 8:10. So I'm going to read Daniel 8:9 through 11 for a little context. It says, and out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, and it grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land. The beautiful land is obviously Israel. Then it grew up to the host of heaven, and caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. And it even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the hosts, and it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. So these things happened, we know, in 70 AD, but when it's talking about the powers of the heaven, it's the host of heaven that were trampled down. So it's the powers of the heavens are the rulers of Israel. According to Daniel, the powers of heaven are the rulers of Israel who would be trampled down. That's what he's talking about there. That's what Jesus is talking about. And Jesus also is saying here in Matthew that they would be shaken. The powers of the heaven would be shaken. And this is significant when you look at this word shaken. And here's some verses with some metaphorical language that's not totally literal. Starting with Psalm 18:7. It says, then the earth shook and quaked, and the foundation of the mountains were trembling and were shaken because he was angry. So you have the mountains shaking, trembling. This is when God defeated Saul and David's enemies by an army. So, and then Psalm 97, we'll read 1 through 5. Yahweh reigns, let the earth rejoice. Let the many coastlands be glad. Cloud and thick darkness are all around him. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. Fire goes before him and burns up the adversaries all around. His lightnings light up the world. The earth sees and trembles. The mountains melt like wax at the presence of Yahweh, at the presence of the Lord of all the earth. Again, you have that same metaphorical language. Micah 1:4. The mountains will melt under him, and the valleys will be split like wax before the fire, like water poured down a steep place. Nahum 1:5. His mountains quake because of him, and the hills melt. Indeed, the earth is upheaved by his presence, the world and all the inhabitants in it. And so all this language you see in the Old Testament, you look at the context of all these passages, they're judgments of cities, of armies. Like Nahum is the judgment of Nineveh. And it uses all that same language. It's not literally talking about destroying mountains, destroying the literal earth. All right, in Hebrews 12:18 through 29, we see the old covenant things shaken and removed, and the new covenant things cannot be shaken. So he says the powers of the heaven will be shaken. Not only is he removing the leaders, he's removing the whole old covenant system. Hebrews 12, starting verse 18. For you have not come to a mountain that can be touched, and a blazing fire, and to darkness and gloom and whirlwind, and to the blast of a trumpet, and the sound of words, which was such that those who heard begged that no further word be spoken to them. For they could not bear what was being commanded. If even a beast touches the mountain, it will be stoned. And so terrible was what appeared that Moses said, I am full of fear and trembling. But you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to myriads of angels, and to the festal gathering and assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood which speaks better than the blood of Abel. See to it they do not refuse him who is speaking. For if those did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will we escape who turn away from him who warns from heaven. And his voice shook the earth then, but now he has promised, saying, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heaven. Now this expression, yet once more, indicates the removing of those things which can be shaken as of created things, so that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us show gratitude by which we may offer to God an acceptable service and with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. So we see the old covenant things that were all physical, tangible things, literal things. They were all shaken and destroyed, even the leaders destroyed, temple destroyed. Now we're in the new covenant, and the new covenant people cannot be destroyed. And he's actually here quoting Haggai 2, so I'm going to read that real quick. In Haggai 2, 6 and 7, he shakes out the old covenant breakers and shakes the nations to fall into the new covenant church. So I'm going to read Haggai 2, verse 6 and 7. For thus says Yahweh of hosts, once more in a little while I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth, the sea, and also the dry land. And I will shake all the nations, and they will come with the desirable things of all nations. And I will fill this house with glory, says Yahweh of hosts. So he's shaking the nations and bringing now in the nations with all their glory that they bring into it. All right, so in Matthew 24, as we've discussed many times, there's a parallel passage. Well, there's Mark 13, but there's also Luke 21. And so I'm going to read Luke 21, 25 and 26, the parallel passage, because there's some more information there that's helpful. And there will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and on the earth anguish among nations, in perplexity at the roaring of the sea and the waves, men fainting from fear and the expectation of the things which are coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. So he talks about the sign in the sun, moon, and stars. And this sign is the Son of Man taking dominion by bringing the curse of destruction upon the covenant breakers via the Roman army. And this goes back to Deuteronomy 28 with the curses. I'm going to read Deuteronomy 28, 45 and 46. So all these curses shall come on you and pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you would not listen to the voice of Yahweh your God to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded you. And they shall become a sign and a wonder on you and your seed forever. So the sign is all the curses that come upon them. So when they're judged by the Roman army, that's a sign from God that the curse has come upon them. And regarding Isaiah 5, that chapter talks about the judgment on Jerusalem by a swift army that is like a lion. But I'm just going to read verse 30 of Isaiah 5. It says, and it will growl over it in that day, like the roaring of the sea. There's that roaring of the sea. If one looks at the land, behold, there is darkness and distress. Even the light is darkened by its clouds. So when they were judged by Babylon, when Isaiah 5 is talking about that, it's going to be like the roaring of the sea when Babylon comes in. And then in Isaiah 51, Yahweh talks about how he established his covenant people and both judges them and saves them. Isaiah 51, 15 and 16, I'm going to read. For I am Yahweh your God, who stirs up the sea and its waves roar. There's that language again. Yahweh of hosts is his name. I have put my words in your mouth and have covered you with the shadow of my hand to establish the heavens, to found the earth, and to say to Zion, you are my people. So he's judging them again from the sea, which sea represents the nations coming in to roar and judge Israel for breaking the covenant. And then he's creating a new covenant with them. In Jeremiah 51:42, this happened to Babylon, who was a type of wicked Israel, as I mentioned earlier. Jeremiah 51:42. The sea has come up over Babylon. She has been covered with its tumultuous waves. So Jeremiah 51 is all about the judgment of Babylon, and you have that same language of the sea coming in, which was the Medo-Persian Empire. All right, let's now look at verse 26 of Luke 21. It talks about men fainting from fear and the expectation of the things which are coming upon the world. So that men fainting from fear, this goes back to the curses again. This is why all this stuff is coming upon Israel, because they broke his covenant. And all these curses are in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Leviticus 36 and 37 says, As for those of you who may remain, I will also bring weakness into their hearts in the lands of their enemies, and the sound of a driven leaf will pursue them. And even when no one is pursuing, they will flee as though from the sword, and they will fall. They will therefore stumble over each other as if running from the sword, although no one is pursuing. And you will have no strength to stand up before your enemies. So it's showing with the curse how fearful they're going to be. And this is what Jesus is talking about. Now in Leviticus here, this was part of the curse for breaking the covenant. But even though the specific text is mainly referring to the Babylonian captivity, it shows how Jesus' generation was also cursed with fear. And then Deuteronomy 28, going to read verse 32 to 34 and 65 and 67. Your sons and your daughters shall be given to another people, while your eyes look on and yearn for them all the day, but there will be nothing you can do. A people whom you do not know shall eat up the produce of your ground and all your labors, and you will never be anything but oppressed and crushed all your days. And you shall be driven mad by the sight of what your eyes see. Verse 65. Moreover, among those nations you shall find no relief, and there will be no resting place for the sole of your foot. But there Yahweh will give you a trembling heart, failing of eyes, and despair of soul. So your life shall hang in doubt before you, and you will be in dread night and day, and shall not have any faith in your life. In the morning you shall say, would that it were evening, and at evening you shall say, would that it were morning. Because of the dread of your heart which you dread, and because of the sight of your eyes which you will see. So Jesus is drawing upon these curses that are about to come upon Jerusalem. And so you got more fear and dread for the covenant breakers. And then in Hebrews 10, 26 and 27, you have a terrifying judgment for covenant breakers. Verse 26, if we go on sinning willfully after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sin, but a terrifying expectation of judgment and the fury of fire which will consume the adversaries. So we see all this fear and dread coming upon them. All right, back to Luke 21. In verse 26, it says, men fainting from fear, and it says, and the expectation of the things which are coming upon the world. This word expectation is only used one other time in the New Testament, in Acts 12:11. Let me read that. When Peter comes to himself, he said, now truly, I know that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from the hand of Herod and from all that the Jewish people were expecting. So what were the Jews expecting? Well, they were expecting business as usual. They stopped Christ, they killed Christ, and they thought they would stop his followers as well. But they weren't able to stop his followers. But what was the expectation of the Old Testament? What should have been their expectation? Well, this Greek word used here only twice in the New Testament is only used 3 times in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. And it's amazing how the Holy Spirit connects the dots for us when we look up these words. It specifically brings us to certain passages, and it's just amazing when you study the Bible this way. So one of those passages, first one, is Genesis 49:10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Obviously, this is referring to Christ. And the expectation was that when Christ comes, obedience will be brought to the peoples. The Jews' expectation was not obedience. It was just their religious business as usual, but Jesus expected obedience, not just to them, but to the nations. And then the second usage in the Old Testament of expectation is Psalm 119. And I'm going to read the section in Psalm 119, verses 113 through 120. I hate those who are double-minded, but I love your law. James talked about how a lot of the Jews were double-minded. You are my hiding place and my shield. I wait for your word. Depart from me, evildoers, that I may observe the commandments of my God. Sustain me according to your word that I may live. And do not put me to shame because of my hope or expectation. It's probably what it is in the Septuagint. Uphold me that I may be saved, that I may have regard for your statutes continually. You have rejected all those who stray from your statutes, for their deceitfulness is a lie. You remove all the wicked of the earth like dross. Therefore I love your testimonies. My flesh quakes for dread of you, and I am afraid of your judgments. So the expectation here in Psalm 119 was judgment of the wicked and salvation of those who love his word. And then one more time, we have Isaiah 66:9 says, shall I bring to the point of breaking forth and not cause birth, says Yahweh? Or shall I, who cause birth, shut the womb, says your God? And so just so you know, Isaiah 65 and 66 is all about the creating of the new covenant. He's giving birth to the new covenant. So the expectation was the expectation of the new covenant. So they're expecting the obedience of the peoples through Christ. They were expecting enemies to be judged. They were expecting salvation, and they were expecting the new covenant. So in all of this, we see that Jesus in the Olivet Discourse is using scripture to define what's going to happen to Jerusalem in his generation, and he chooses every word carefully to connect all these passages and more that we've seen today. So let us therefore rejoice in how awesome God's word is and how Christ is truly the way, the truth, and the life.